Welcome to you all. My name is Leah Bordelin, and I am the Associate Director of Programming for the Trico Foundation Social Entrepreneurship Center. Today, I'd like to welcome you to the October 2023 edition of AMAASE, which is Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise. I'm normally working with numerous centers, but Trico, the Trico Center holds a special place in my heart, and I'm really honored to be here today. Just a quick note for you all that today's session will be recorded. So if you're not able to attend the live session or you want to go back and rewatch the discussion, you'll certainly have that opportunity. Before we do get started, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Calgary is situated on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and this includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Thank you to Denise, who's also acknowledged the Treaty 7 territory that we are both at least situated on today. So AMAASE is our monthly opportunity for members of the ecosystem to access and ask questions of a panel of capacity builders. And this is held on the second Wednesday of every month from 3:30 to 5 or until our questions run out. So these sessions are designed with our audience and attendees as the driver of the discussion. So this is your time and your questions that we're all here for. And I welcome you to, dive into those questions as we get together. Today, we have a small but mighty panel. We have Jane Bisbee, the Executive Director of the Social Enterprise Fund, and Dan Overall, the Executive Director of the Trico Charitable Foundation. And I believe that's our mighty panel for the day. Now, a number of you did share your questions when you registered, but we would love for you to just, either write in the chat or turn on your mic and ask us your question.
I should jump in, Leah, as we're waiting for the first question. Jeff's going to be joining us soon. He's just having some technical difficulties.
Oh, great. Okay, super. So we will be even mightier in a short while.
Denise, but not if we get any don't get any questions.
That's right. So, here we go. This is Jeff now.
So something that's really important about this session is that it doesn't work if the people with the questions who want to learn about social enterprise don't ask them, because we don't come with a presentation to make.
That's right.
To engage in a conversation with you and try to drill down and get you an answer to the questions you've got. So please, because if you don't, I'll go back to the pile of paper on my desk.
And there's no such thing as a silly question. We're all learners here. Social entrepreneurship is such a new concept. So chances are, if you're thinking about the issue, there's someone else who's thinking about it too. So it really helps the community build if you ask your questions.
Hi, this is Livia. I submitted some questions, but I submitted today, so I'm not sure if you guys got it.
Go ahead and tell us.
Okay, thank you. So I'm exploring right now where I am with my business idea. It's more like an ideation. And at the first stage of talking to customers. So I'm collecting surveys right now, and I'm getting ready to do problem interviews to learn more about their problems. And so my questions are related to that. Basically, what is the best way to learn, okay, is this a big enough problem for my customers, or it's not a big enough problem? So I'm an ESL student, I'm a LING instructor. So I work with newcomers, and we have huge wait lists. And I have, professionals from a different country who are, they cannot start working on in their profession because of their English. And yet we have a wait list. And sometimes they wait 6 months for classes. And also they are frustrated with the speed of the learning in a classic classroom setting. Even if it's online is even worse. So I'm thinking is, cannot we speed up this process with technology? Can we make it, better, more efficient? If we bring in technology, and that can be very affordable, and you don't have to line up for it, it can be scaled. And it can help people who work during the day in survival jobs, but they want to eventually reach to that level in English and get certified and continue with their profession. And we have lots of those guys. And I talked to them. I sent out 25 of my students, and 10 of them already sent the survey back. So I'm getting some answers. I reached out to community organizations, my connections with other organizations, and they are sending out too. So I'm hoping to get some answers. But how? And
How
then
do you,
how to go about it? Yeah, I don't have a background to do this kind of primary research. Yeah. Sorry, it was very long.
no, it helped give us a bit of an idea about where you're starting from. So that's helpful. I think you're doing a really smart thing, is you're asking the potential customers, so is this a thing? The fact that they're lined up, that you have a waiting list, suggests that whatever it is you're offering has an audience. The question is do they want it enough to pay for it? Sometimes that's the next leap, to decide whether or not they're an actual customer. They're just someone who could use your service if you could figure out how to turn it into a business somehow. I saw Jeff nodding. You have a lot of individuals, I think, at Momentum that would have this same sort of challenge around language, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and we don't do the English as additional language training, but lots of people that do our training programs have done additional English as additional language training. I agree with Jane, Livia, that like the best thing that you're doing is kind of testing the market by getting that customer feedback early before sort of doing this robust development of what you could offer, is like test your potential offer as soon as possible and get that feedback. And I think one way, when you ask like, how do you get a sense of how big the problem is to Jane's point of like, how much are people willing to pay? And if they're not able to pay because they're in a survival job and they're maybe not willing or able to access their assets that they've come to Canada with, who else could pay some of it? Like figuring out like, what's the revenue model for your offering as soon as possible. But I think asking that question, like how much would you potentially be willing to pay to do this language training, could give you a sense of how big a problem it is. Then you have that extra potential problem of, if they're not able to pay that amount that you need to make it financially viable, then you have to figure out the potential sort of more two customer model of the learner paying and then somebody else contributing to the pay. Yeah.
Something you said there, Jeff, reminds me of another piece of the puzzle. So the whole customer exploration is a important step. I would think the other piece that Jeff mentioned is that there are other providers out there who are doing language training. And so you might want to find out everything you can about how they work, who pays them, if you can find out what fees they charge and all of that kind of piece. That might give you a good picture about where you would fit in the ecosystem, who your competition is. And you may find that you can do a different model that would work for the customers you've discovered. Or you might find out that often, sometimes people find out that the marketplace is crowded. There's already enough providers. But it sounds like because you know about waiting lists that there's a potential there that the market isn't too crowded. But I'd still find out everything you can about what the other guys are doing and steal all the good ideas and throw out the bad ones, because that can help you set up a better operation as well.
Yes, you're right, of course. So I'm not even thinking about a traditional classroom-based any kind of language instruction, because I think that's provided by the federal government, is provided by ESL schools, who's been in the place for a long time. Even right now, Alberta federal government is considering an idea, and they're doing research on having local Alberta curriculum. So that's in the process. They've been doing it for a year, now they're deciding. So that's covered. What I see is the inefficiency of this model for today's extremely busy lifestyle. And people are super frustrated that they come to class, they spend 2 hours, 4 days a night, but the progress is super slow. So we need, as adult learners, we need lots of repetitions. We need all sorts of tricks. And this is available online, some of it, but it's not specific to, say, healthcare professionals. It's not specific to engineers. It's not specific to tech professionals. So what they do is they come and they learn English, but they're like, this is not relevant to me, and this is super slow. So there must be something more efficient, better way to do it. And of course, if you use technology, it's already available. Phone, everybody has a phone, everybody has a tablet. And so instead of sending them to a million different online available free practices, which is, I already have a resource list for them, but can we create something efficient that doesn't require them to spend hours searching? Comes in your phone from an app every day or an inbox, and you study on the bus, study half an hour, but it's specific. It's tailored to you to help you to get that certification and get you working in Canada as soon as possible. Anyway, no.
These are really great points. What I would add is 2 things. One, we're big believers in something called the adoption curve, which suggests all customers aren't created equally. So especially when you're looking at technical innovation, look for those who really believe in your idea and are really willing to work with you to help you develop it, and zero in on them. And then the second one is there's this video by a company called Owlet, which provides an absolute clinic on customer discovery and experimentation. Ida, if you have the Owlet link handy, if you could just put it in the chat. I've learned more about customer discovery in just this 5 to 7 minute video of their development. So I would have you check that out. And Ida, send me a message if you can't find it, and then I'll track it down and put it in the chat.
Thank you so much. That would be perfect timing for me.
Livia, it sounds like you are really thinking about the right things in terms of like, how can you do things differently? Like, what's your unique value proposition and how you can kind of disrupt the market and add value. So like, you're thinking of all the right things, and then you just have to like keep making sure you know your market. That sounds like an awesome resource that Dan suggested. I hadn't heard of that one, so I look forward to checking it out too. And then yeah, just keep thinking of the business model that will work. But there is room, I think you're right, that there's room for disruption. And you know that the market is only getting bigger if our projections for new Canadians coming to Canada move forward like how they're projected. So you have like you have some of the ripe market conditions for disruption. So good job.
Yeah, and
Okay, thank you.
you did mention the government program. Certainly, the feds are really interested in this as well. They might be, both the feds and the province might be interested in developing something that's a disruptive technology in this whole area. Yes, they may be paying for in class and certain kinds of traditional approaches, but I think Jeff's right that thinking about the disruptions is a good idea, and that they might help you get to the technical aspect of being able to do it, because they may be looking for a more efficient way of doing it as well.
Okay, thank you. Just one more quick question, if there is time, if possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So what are the business models out there, how to combine the social aspect, but it's a tech and education? So I'm familiar with some of the social models, but maybe there's some that I don't know. So how can, this is a tech-based educational business idea, but is there any social models that apply?
So what you need to find is the corporate structure. There is no, in Alberta, there is no specific social corporate structure. There are in a couple of other provinces, but not here. What you really need to do is find the correct corporate structure, nonprofit, for-profit, corporation, company, cooperative, whatever, that will best suit the management and delivery of the work that you're doing. We could spend hours talking about what does that mean, but it really comes down to, I mean, I often do an exercise with clients that come in that are puzzled about this, where I say to them, what do you want this to look like in 10 years? 5 years, 10 years, walking around, what do you want it to be? How do you want to be managing it? How do you see it operating on a day-to-day basis? And then that gives a good idea about what you need to look for in a structure that will manage it. So for example, if you see it being managed and operated by a volunteer board who make day-to-day decisions, then you'd get one kind of structure. If you see it being done, owned and operated by a whole lot of people, it might be a cooperative. So there is no perfect answer to your question. It's only more questions around what do you want it to be? And then you start to look for the vehicle that can hold that. Your customer and your revenue stream will probably have an answer for that as well. For example, if the only customer is the government and the only people they will pay money to do this kind of thing is a not-for-profit, then that kind of answers your question. So there is no perfect answer. You cannot register to be a social enterprise. But there are plenty of corporate structures that operate in all different ways that can then answer what it is that you need to do.
Yeah, Livia, I would just add that there's pros and cons of all the different forms. So just as Jane said, it depends on what ends up being your business model. And I would just encourage you to not overly think too much in terms of what's the social business model. I think about what's the social impact you're going to have. And then you use your business model to achieve that social impact in a way that's financially viable or sustainable. Oh. So, for example, it sounds like you know your social impact. You're trying to address the problem of new Canadians that come to Canada that are underemployed because their professional skills from their home country aren't utilized, and that language is a barrier for them to get a job in their profession. There's also all the other barriers like credential recognition and whatnot, but you have your sense of what's the social impact and what's the social problem you're trying to address. And now you're kind of developing what's the business model using educational technology and figuring out a more efficient way to provide the language training, efficient and effective way to provide the language training. So I wouldn't worry then about what's the social business model. Just figure, like, just keep your end in mind of like, you want to have that social impact and you want it to be financially viable, like as a business, and then for you as the founder or operator of the business. So that's why for us at Momentum, we use a sustainable business canvas where we get people to think about the social impact that they're going to have. But it's really focused on like, what's the business model that's also going to be viable.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. Business first, and then the rest will follow.
Now, Olivia, was your question focused on legal structure or like various possible business models?
More like the business models, but I understand that it looks like I have time to figure that out once the testing is going forward and I have some proof that, okay, people are interested and this is a big problem, then I can get back to it.
I can just very quickly rattle off some possibilities. Like there's so many possibilities, excuse me. And a lot of it is just you being creative. And I can give you some examples of people that have been really creative in business models, but just off the top of my head, like obviously Facebook looks at advertising revenue or data collection. So that's other. Sponsorship is another possibility. There's sliding scales. So what you have is if some of your customers can pay more than others, they pay a bit more and kind of cover. You can do even a buy one, give one. So somebody subscribes to your service and they know that it will go to someone else will get the service who can't pay for it. Pay what you can is another model. Those are some of the most basic ones that jump out at me, but sometimes really the sky is the limit when it comes to how creative you want to be and tapping into a business model that you combine a social impact with.
Mm-hmm. And we can use whatever other apps are using as business model, right? For the free version, you have the tiny little ad at the bottom. It's there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Another one is where the first little bit is free, and then if you want more deluxe services, you pay for those. It's lots of options. And what's good about the discipline you're bringing to your customer discovery process is you can experiment with a variety of models, right, and see which resonates the most.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Blank famously defined a startup as trying to figure out your business model before your money runs out. And the Olive video I sent you, as well as the experiments you're doing, is just trying to do experiments in a way that doesn't break the bank for you, so you can figure it out before the money that you have runs out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. It's very helpful at this point for me.
Great. Well, if there's more questions, we can keep going. I think it's great that you're so close to your, potential customers, that you're working with them already. So that's really helpful for you. Definitely. Yeah. Now I see that Tamara had her hand up. I'm just noticed that there are a couple of other questions in the chat, and I'm just going to jump into one that was sort of similar to something we were talking about with Livia, and that's from Alberta. Can the panel define social enterprise versus social cause versus corporate donation?
Dan, that's yours.
I take the lead. Well, Trico Charitable Foundation defines social entrepreneurship as using business models to serve social needs. That's very similar to most Canadian definitions. You can find some that are different, and that's part of the challenge in this space because there's no official definition. Whenever you're talking to someone or a funder or a government, look at what their specific definition is, but that will kind of be the base. In terms of corporate donation, that's just where a company donates a certain percentage of their profit to a social cause. It can get really technical if you want to argue, hey, is that a social enterprise or not? There are some organizations, ventures, that have created themselves just specifically to donate some of their proceeds to a social cause. So very technically, you can make an argument that it is social enterprise. What we try to do is say, let's focus on the definition and this idea of how can we make the most of business models to serve social need. I think that's like really exciting. So for example, if a company is just donating 5% of its profits to a charitable cause, nurturing that discussion of if they want to get to the next level of having a social impact, what could it look like? And there's so many possibilities. And then for the other one is social cause. I haven't really heard about that. I know there's social cause marketing and buy social and stuff like that. That's where you buy the product because it's going to be connected to some social cause. And that's the best of what I can explain for the social cause. So hope that helps. By all means, panel, jump in if I've missed anything. And Alberta Telfer, if I missed the mark, feel free to follow up with some questions.
I would just add that it's kind of messy and it's a continuum, and I don't think it's worth getting caught in definitional sort of paralysis. Because a social cause, I would say, is like more like advocacy. It's where you're trying to push for social change. It could relate to a social movement. Oftentimes there's maybe less of a business activity. You're not necessarily selling a product or service to a potential customer, but not always. Like, I think you can have a social cause that still has some element of, you're doing a social movement, but you're selling t-shirts to try to raise funds for your next march or next rally. So I think it's so difficult to like say this or that and to put things into boxes. And that's sort of like, I think a lot of us try not to get hung up on the definition, and a lot of groups and we in Alberta used to do this too, of like have your continuum that like on one end is like their traditional like business activity, and on the other end is like a traditional charity, and then there's like the blended returns in the middle where it could be more of a social enterprise or more of a co-op. But even that continuum approach, I don't think adds that much value. Clearly by Jane's body language as soon as I named a continuum. But I did a quick search, and this is one of the continuums that Futurepreneur has on their website, and it's one of the classic ones that you used to see all the time like 10 or 15 years ago. So
I love Dan's definition, and you're absolutely right, Jeff, in that getting all tied up in it often doesn't help. But it doesn't hurt to understand where someone might be coming from. Like there are so many definitions that almost everybody who works in this field seems to have one that's slightly different, and that's okay. But I have people coming to me and saying, but we're a social enterprise. And I have to try to explain to them, you're not a social enterprise enough for my investors, right? So I know I have colleagues who are investors in the social finance field who are doing investments that I'd never get past my investors because they're looking for something a little different. So you just need to understand that investors or grantors, anyone who's involved in that kind of process, has goals that they're trying to hit, marks that they're trying to hit. I'm afraid one of my investors at the table put it a little crassly. Says there's not enough good in that. They're a good corporate citizen, but it's not really what I'm looking for to be able for us to invest in. So be aware that you might not fit one person's mold about what is appropriate for what they want to get involved with, and you may absolutely hit the mark for somebody else. It's a bit of a fluid thing, and you always have to understand that in the finance field, at least, people have goals about what they want to do and where they want to put their investments. And if it doesn't work for you, then move on to the next one, because there's probably another one that would fit, be better relationship for you.
The definition of almost anything is the most boring part of that thing. It's what you want to do with it, where you want to take it. So I would encourage you to focus on that. I mean, as we've said, be respectful of where other people are coming from, like if they're funders or something like that you're dealing with. But when it comes to you and the journey you want, blaze your own trail of how you can imagine using business models to serve social needs.
Thank you. I'll just say that's really helpful. Actually, my former coworker forwarded me the invite like late this morning. And so I just wanted to have a baseline for what you folks are consider. But that's super helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question, Alberta. Next, I'm going to go to Denise's question, which is also in the chat. Denise, do you just want to explain for us perhaps what's going on, and then our panel can provide some thoughts and ideas?
Sure. I'm creating a pitch deck for investors for my business because I'm in that weird situation where I have a social enterprise under a for-profit organization where I've built or I'm finalizing a model, but there's no revenue streams yet. And I need the investments to get to the next revenue, to build the revenue streams out, I guess. So on a nonprofit, I'm not a nonprofit organization, so there's many of the grants that are social enterprise for nonprofits don't qualify for me. And then on the for-profit, I don't have any revenue streams creating revenue yet, so I don't qualify for regular business. So I'm in that ugly little spot of prove to us you have a for-profit and prove to us you have a social enterprise kind of thing.
We call that the valley of death.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah.
So I'm creating this pitch deck, and I would like to know if you have any tips on how to create one that encompasses both, that because they're so intertwined they can't be separated. So the social cause side is very intertwined for creating the for-profit revenue streams, and the for-profit doesn't really work without the social enterprise side. As just a overview, I'm creating a gender-based violence and other violence database, national one across Canada, as well as a help portal for the silent survivor that is maybe not necessarily ready to reach out to supports, but starting to research. That's the social cause. The for-profit is working with the nonprofit organizations to bring awareness for their expertise. So shelters across Canada, sexual assault centers across Canada. So we are an awareness and a connecting organization with the database for the organizations and the help portal for the individuals that will never be charged for. Or there, I'll stop there.
Welcome to my world. I'm the one who gets this kind of pitch to me all the time. And one thing I would say is stop thinking about it as separate yourself. You need to stop thinking about this as two different things. And the for-profit part is just the vehicle to make this go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I look for and what I hope that social entrepreneurship can do is to get any business, regardless of its corporate structure, to understand that it needs to make impact at all levels of its operation. So how you treat your employees, how you work in community, what's your goal and what's your product or service that you're giving, it's all part of a whole. And I would say if you stop thinking about it as two different things, it will come together. And that your presentation to potential financing partners, they will see that as well. Now, yes, there will be the traditional finance world will look at what you're doing and think, well, how in God's name is that going to drive revenue and at the level that I want it? So that's where you need to find somebody else who looks at finance differently. Sometimes I've had entrepreneurs who've said to me that they get real schizophrenic when they go into the room. They present however that person wants to receive. So if that person's all about bottom line in the kind of financing that they're doing, then that's what they present. And the whole social purpose side of it becomes a nice to have. By the way, you can make money, but you can also do good in community. So some of it is about tempering the message to who's there when you're putting together your materials. I'm probably the wrong person to talk to right now, because in recent months I've developed a real hatred of decks. Pitch decks to me are a marketing tool that don't really tell me much about what I really want to know about your company, which is what the mission is that you're doing, what your management structure and expertise and experience, what do the numbers look like? Do you actually have customer discovery? Have you done the research that Livia is doing on who your customer is, and have that deep understanding about where your money's going to come from? And I find that pitch decks are often way too superficial, and I'd rather get into the real due diligence. Now, I know there's a lot of interest out in the world about having people pitch. There's endless, you could spend all your time going to pitch sessions. And a lot I think that you need to think about too is who you are talking to and what kind of money do you want. If you are as early as you say in your journey, I would suggest, like, do you really want to you don't know what the valuation of your company is, so you can't possibly decide what the valuation is with any sort of accuracy. You need to prove out who your customer and your revenue stream is a little bit, and maybe that's where you want to buy some money. You want to go for debt financing rather than equity, or even some sort of straight grants. And I do think there are grants out there that that might help you get through some of the early startup stuff. Like, I mean, in your case, Alberta Women Entrepreneurs has investments that they can make and grants. I would think that there is some places, if you Canadian Women's Foundation, if you looked at that, I think there are places that, because free money is always the best.
Mm-hmm.
But I think don't worry about spending your time pitching to venture capitalists, because I'm not sure that they will get what you're doing. Really look for who's specialized in what you want to solve, and go after them. I'm sure my colleagues will have.
Have you talked to USEED?
USEED.
They're with Innovate Calgary. That might be a great resource. And I'm wondering, fellow panelists, Help Seeker is for profit, are they not? Because it sounds like that was a similar journey. So you may want to check out Help Seeker, just their website, and then speak to them about how they attract, because it's not exactly the same model, but it's in the ballpark. So we're big believers in find like a kindred spirit who's actually been there, done that, and then get as much information from them as possible. And it sounds like Help Seeker might be a perfect model for you to.
Okay. I did, just a little bit more background. I did get a grant from Women in Gender Equality to start it. And it was a fairly large grant, but it doesn't build out my viability, proof of viability after the database has been built.
Who's your customer? Who's your customer?
My customers, nonprofit organizations and organizations who serve the individual directly.
You've got a real road to hoe. Yeah, there are. I've seen many of that business model, and you're right, Dan. Help Seekers is probably the closest to it. Mm-hmm. So I would, that you've got I would talk to Lean. I think Dan's right. Jeff, I'll shut up.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to encourage you, similar to what Jane said, is not view it as two separate entities, but how they work together and are mutually supportive. And then I also think you should be thinking about, like, what's the hybrid model? It may not be all grant and all fee for service based revenue, especially if your customer is nonprofits. Nonprofits tend not to have a lot of money to pay very well. So the margin
Says the guy who runs a great big nonprofit.
Well, not that big and not that much extra cash floating around. So it's just we have experience with it too, that we've tried to do financial literacy training so other nonprofits can use our financial literacy curriculum. We first tested like, oh, could we make this like a pure fee for service model? Well, we couldn't even remotely cover our costs with what other nonprofits were willing to pay us for that training, the license of the curriculum and the training. So we still have nonprofits that do our capacity building work and our training. They pay, but we also have outside grant-based, because we're structured as a nonprofit charity. We have grant-based money that really subsidizes the fee for other nonprofits so that it can be financially viable for us. So that's our experience of, it's a tricky business model when your primary customer is nonprofits that help seekers in the same boat. That's a good example. Technology Helps, which is a tech company based in Calgary, another example where their primary customer is nonprofits paying for their technology support services. And then the other model I thought of when you were describing the two aspects of your work, but with a focus on your target market being nonprofits, is the Scale Collaborative. So that's the link there. So they're based in BC. They do a lot of work with nonprofits to try to become more financially viable, but they use a hybrid model for a lot of their work, that they have foundations and other granting sources be their customer. So they pay then for nonprofits to do their training program. So the direct customer of the nonprofit isn't actually the paying customer. It's foundations and other entities that have more cash that have the ability to pay. So I do think it's worthwhile to look at other organizations that are not in the same space of gender-based violence, but pursuing this similar model where the nonprofit's the primary customer, and then likely it's going to have to be some form of hybrid model that can work. We're also looking at Canada Alberta Job Grant. Like if you're offering training, then as long as it's training that's eligible for Canada Alberta Job Grant, that's another way to make it more financially viable for staff at non-for-profits, because they could apply for that training grant.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Next we have Tamara. Am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, thank you. It's Leah, right? Or Lee?
Yeah, Leah. Yeah.
Leah, perfect. Okay, we both had to confirm. I changed my mind about the question. I wanted to back up a little bit because I know some of you people around the virtual table, and so I'm wearing many hats tonight. So I am affiliated with the University of Calgary because I have an adjunct assistant appointment with Faculty of Medicine. But I'm not here for that tonight. I'm here actually because I'm new. I started less than 2 months ago at an organization called Women in Need Society. It is a social enterprise. Jane, it's good to see you. Jeff, it's great to see you. Daniel, it's good to see you. I know these people because they've been part of my life in some way, but I've been in this space for quite some time. And I put my hand up because I was listening to the question, and I kind of thought this is similar to why I came tonight, because at WINS, our structure is we're a charity, but we have a model that embraces the social enterprise, right? So we don't have a business, so it's a charity. So we kind of have this duality that we struggle with on a regular basis. And I know Jane and I were talking about this a little bit at the Canadian Women's Foundation event. So that's why we're chuckling a little bit, because we're trying to decide if this because what I learned when I went through the Trico Foundation training like 20 plus years ago when it first started was you have a business arm and you have a charitable arm, and that's sort of how it functions, and it works really brilliantly. I have a business background, so I have an affiliation with Haskane. So, I mean, this makes perfect sense to me, and that's why I joined WINS. And so the problem for WINS is we are always in this tension that Jeff spoke about, where charities have no money because we don't have a lot of money to be able to do some of the things that we want to do. But I think one thing that I wanted just to share was like the ability for us to be creative. So at WINS, I think we are being very creative. And so what I was speaking with Jane about, and maybe this social finance fund, is maybe we get money to expand our our stores. So we're a thrifting organization, for those of you that don't know what WINS is. And so when we expand, because it's totally a reverse in my brain, because, you know, companies that have too many models like Starbucks or Chapters, well, we start to see them close over time. Not WINS. The more WINS stores that we can open, the more money we generate. The more money we generate can then help our programs, like, you know, and our services and what we do. So we want to expand our programs and services. So we need more stores. So I was like, Jane, if we could get some social finance fund money to totally take care of our expansion, that would be great. But then I'm now getting all these questions about, and I know I realize I've gone on way too long than I should have, but I put up my hand because I wanted to have a conversation about structure. Then Jane threw me all off when she started answering, well, what is the purpose? And like, what are you trying to, I'm like, she's right. Okay. And then Jeff said some stuff and I went, okay, I'm just going to withdraw my hand. So now I'm confused. So I'm here because I wanted to connect with all of you. I want to meet a kindred spirit. I want to help other people that are trying to, you know, get in this space. And so again, WINS, happy to connect with anybody who's thinking about a charity and a social enterprise. And I'm happy to share all the learnings that I've had in the last 2 months, but it's actually been 20 plus years, but 2 years at this organization. And I'm just going to stop there, but lovely to be here. And I'm really looking forward to connecting with all of you in some way. Thank you, Leah.
Well, I'm sorry, Tamara. I thought you would put your hand down because I knew you were there. But anyone want to?
Well, since Jeff and I just confused the issue, maybe Dan should start on this.
Well, actually, what jumps out at me is, I think one of the challenges with, and I talk general, not specific to WINS, but an organization like WINS, is when you do have a social enterprise that's generating revenue, careful not to say profit, all the revenue goes to the mothership as opposed to reinvesting in the social enterprises. So in a way, you're kind of leading the social enterprise from that chance to then reinvest in it and grow it. So if you do go a route like getting funding, you're still going to have to take some of the money from the social enterprise and not put in the mothership, but actually repay back the funding. So I'm wondering, maybe it'd be useful as an initial dialogue in any organization in your situation is say, well, should we maybe take less of the revenue that's being generated from the social enterprise into the mothership and start looking at an investment strategy for growing the social enterprise so we can get the additional revenue that you're talking about in the expansion? Or maybe it's like a hybrid of, we'll take some of that money and put it into reinvestment, and we'll take some of that money and pay off a debt that we get in a lump sum, right? So these are the kinds of things I think as a starting point for you to think about of the options you now have because you have very strong social enterprises.
I'm on mute. Thank you for that, Daniel, because that's where I'm thinking we need to go. I'm not saying I represent the organization. I'm not the CEO. I'm not the board. So I am just one person who started, but this is what I used as how I got hired. So I think I have some traction here. And when I saw this come across my UFC email, I was like, I must go to this and connect with these people. So I think I've made the right decision. But this is where I think we need to start thinking, because we're in this tension. It's like, well, do we keep investing in the programs? Well, that's why our charity exists. Of course we need to do that. But it's like, no. We have to feed our business. So we desperately need an investment strategy. And so I don't know if that's this group or not, but I want to get there. And I'm hoping over the next, couple of months that I'm getting there and that we're starting to move forward in that right direction. Because I think there's an appetite to really look at this, because we're starting to do this right. And it feels great. And it's fantastic. And we're helping lots of people, but we also have this responsibility not for it to crash and burn. So I'm a little nervous that if we don't do it right, there could be this crashing and burning. So thank you for saying that.
Well, I'll give the panel a chance in a second, but I want to actually double down on how amazing WINS is and just share a story with everybody else that's in attendance. But again, just half the battle with this stuff is realizing the possibilities in doing this. So this is me as an outsider, but I'll do my best in telling the story about WINS. So they get a lot of donated clothing and then they sell it, and clothing that's not suitable for selling, they used to recycle. And recycling was like pennies pennies on the pound. So I had this great idea to bulk some of these products and then sell them so that, you get 10 shirts that aren't the greatest, but it'd be like really discount. So they reimagined what they had, and it's been profoundly financially successful to them. And again, it's just that creativity of, hey, we have an asset here. We think we're undervaluing it by just going to recycle and getting pennies on the dollar. Is there a market that we could tap into with what we have? And it's, again, that's that inspiration of just always thinking about how you can use business models to serve the social needs you want. And WINS and its Restore, that it's called, is just a fantastic example of that.
No, thank you.
Very cool. I'm going to add one little thought for you to take away too. The thing that I've found really interesting about social entrepreneurship is it says that you should use the business tools, the best practices that businesses figured out in ways that help you inside your charitable arm too. So I know you're thinking about it as two pieces, but it's a skill set that might help on both sides. And that might even help eventually for people to get the idea that money isn't evil and you use it as a tool to help things grow on both sides of what sounds like a divide but isn't really and shouldn't be. And so we don't train people in the nonprofit world in particular to think about money as a thing that gets stuff done and that it shouldn't be you shouldn't be afraid of it. And so the whole investing back into the social enterprise piece in those stores is absolutely critical. It doesn't hurt to have the same kind of business-like thinking going on in the nonprofit. I'm often fascinated by how really, really smart business people go onto a board of a nonprofit and their brains fall out at the door. It's like they accept things inside the nonprofit they would never do inside their own business. So to me, that's what the real magic about social entrepreneurship is that eventually we get an economy where everybody thinks across the board on what is the good they're doing in community, how are they in society, how are they treating the environment, what are their supply chains like, how do they treat that it's all drawn together into one kind of operational entity, and that it uses all the best tools that they teach up in business school. So that might help make the board, if you can bring that kind of thinking to the board on the charity side, it might not be such a battle to get them to see that they have to invest in the other side too.
Thank you.
Tamara, that was a similar comment I was going to share, is when you shared how you did the Trico training.
I think you facilitated that with, and I'm not going to name drop, but I think Jeff, you were part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been a facilitator, but like
you facilitated us getting it. Yeah.
The Trico training has evolved in some ways, if that was your impression then, because now it's so much based on the blended, and it's not like the business arm and the social impact or nonprofit arm. It's about how do the two, the social impact and the business activity work together in Jane's point. And so I would encourage you with the WINS.
Take it again.
Well, maybe take it again, like look at the blender content on the Trico website. But I would encourage you to, like, in the conversations with the WINS team, think about like, what ends do you want to achieve? What do you want to have more impact through? Do you want to have more impact by expanding the thrift stores and then hiring people to work at the thrift stores? Or do you want to have more impact through the more traditional charitable activities that WINS does through the resource centers, as an example? So that's, I think about what the ends are, and then what you think the best way to achieve those are, and how you will then pay to achieve those ends. I think that's more important than, is it about expanding the business or is it about the charitable work? It's just, what's the highest and best way that like WINS can increase its impact? Because that's ultimately what you're trying to achieve. So that, and I would just recommend maybe like touch base with probably the closest business model to WINS in Calgary is Habitat for Humanity. And I was just chatting with Jared over the summer, and like their thrift store is still kicking butt too. Like the Habitat Restore is making quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, they're fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
I can use them myself, right? We often, if we get things at the door, we'll say, hey, you know, Habitat takes this, they're just down the street, or, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. So yeah.
Just
No,
think
it's-
about what you can learn and share
Yeah.
with Habitat, just because they're probably the closest in terms of the business model.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, I'm taking crazy notes. If you see me going like this, I'm writing like a crazy person. So thank you, everybody.
Don't forget, it's recorded. You could listen to it all again.
I was kind of a little late. I apologize for that, but I was a little bit late, and I think I just noticed it's in the top left-hand corner. It says recording. Yeah. Thanks, Jane.
What I love is that we've had folks that are just getting started, and then we have wins, and we have like rethinking the business models ideas. Everything is just continual, you know, it doesn't matter where you're at. It's always being thought out over and over. So that's wonderful. Jorge had a question in here. Jorge, are you still with us? And do you want to just share with us what you're thinking about here?
Yes. Thank you. This is quite intimidating for me because, you know, we're going to go back to one of those projects that are very early on. So let me tell you a little bit about what I do. So basically, I lead a project called YYC Data Post. What we do is we basically take open data from released by governments or organizations and try to inform citizens to spark citizen engagement. Now, how do we do that? And how is that different from like a traditional media outlet? Is because we create data stories at the community or neighborhood level, because we believe that in Calgary, every neighborhood has a different story to tell and has different needs. And we believe that by, you know, bringing those stories to surface, we will be able to engage a little bit more to residents and citizens to do something about it, right? So that's the short story of what we do. Now, so far, we're mostly volunteer-led, volunteer-run, really. So it's a group of 10 of us or so that we do this work. And we just started early this year. So we're early on, but I'm already thinking about, okay, what kind of a structure and what kind of form what's so far a project can take if it continues on, right? We also, of course, foresee the need of some potential funding for some of our operations and work that we do. So that's basically what brought me here.
Couple of clarifying questions, if I might.
Yes.
Were you here at the beginning? So we don't repeat.
I was not.
Everything?
I'm very sorry. I joined a little bit late as well. Yes.
It's no problem. We may end up repeating stuff, we may not. I can think of a couple of different models, but first I'd like to know, what do you see as the revenue stream and who's your customer?
That's a good question. So I see it in two ways, honestly. So in one way, our publications, our content, right, that it can be either published digitally or printed, could be used. We tailor the content to be used by community associations because we believe they have the main point of contact with residents. Of course, community associations are run by volunteers that have limited budgets to pay for this stuff, right? And if we really want them to adopt this kind of information and release it, I believe we have to subsidize it the best way possible. That's one thing. Now, the other element of our operations too, which is interesting, is our volunteers, most of our volunteers are people who want to learn to do data analysis and develop their skills, right? And I do see some potential there too, to say, okay, we're actually teaching them in some way. Many of us who have a bit more experience end up spending hours and hours with these more junior skilled people, and they learn through this exercise as well. So there's a benefit to that, but I don't know if that's something that can be capitalized, of course.
Yeah. And what is your content like? So is it data or is it
infographics? It's infographics and reports. So a short digital stories. It could be taking the form of charts with some highlights of what we've seen, what we found.
So it's not like journalism content, which
Not
also
necessarily,
have
yeah.
reports. I mean, my favorite thing is looking at charts in the Wall Street Journal. They do graphics like nobody's business.
Yes, yeah.
But that's also got other content around it.
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
So we would only focus on the chart part of it, because our argument is that in social media where attention is so short, we want to be able to, send a quick message to people of what's happening in their communities.
I would think you maybe need to take a page out of Livia's book and do some customer research around what do your customers want, and are they buying what you're proposing, and how much value is it to them? And I might do something like go and talk to, I mean, I can see an organization like CCVO, using what you're doing, and that you would be able to work through an organization like that to provide research and presentation of research to people. I think before I would want to wander down what structure you should have, I would say I want to know what the answer to that was. And also then the other question, forgive me for those of you who heard this before, what do you want it to look like in 10 years, in 5 years and 10 years? What's your ideal structure? Like, how do you want it to work? Who do you want making the decisions? Who owns it? How does it walk around in the world? And then you kind of work your way back from that, and that will give you a place to start to look at what corporate structure. Just from hearing that, that brief overview, probably we could spend more time nailing down into it. I would look, even though it's not quite the same kind of content that you're dealing with. Do you know Taproot up here in Edmonton?
No.
So Taproot came out of a couple of journalists who lost their job when they disappeared the Edmonton Journal's newsroom. And so what they do is kind of a whole host of things, most of it online, digital, but it's kind of compiles information from a whole number of sources. They do specific packaging of info for organizations, like find us everything that's going on about arts, or find us everything that's, around environmental research, what studies are going on, and digest that for us. They have an online daily thing where there are people paying attention to City Hall. So those of us who are political geeks are onto that. They do podcasts. So they're kind of packaging information in different ways, same way you're talking to, for a whole variety of audiences to be able to monetize the special kinds of content to different audiences. So how they've done it, they're for profit. A few people got together to run a company to do this. You might want to reach out and talk to them about how did they structure it, and what's it look like, and what's their business model internally look like. Also, you might want to, this is a bit of a long shot, but if you think an online channel, an over the top technology channel, like you want your own YouTube channel that YouTube doesn't take your money, like you're not on YouTube, but you're actually using the same technology. There's a company in Calgary called Public Place Network, which actually does the technology part for you to have your own online channel, so that you can put up content, drive people to it. All the revenue stream comes to you. There's no irritating ads that pop up that have nothing to do with you. The only advertising or revenue stream is yours. And you also don't have to give up your intellectual property rights, which you do on YouTube. So if that's a delivery platform that might work for what you're doing, you might want to look at partnering with them.
Awesome. Thank you. No, those are amazing comments. That's exactly what I was looking to hear. Yes, thank you so much.
Then somebody else better say something that he didn't want to hear, because obviously I've missed something.
Hey, that's my job. Jeff has put some really good additional ones for you to follow through. And I'm embarrassed to say, we've talked about tech a lot today. Both Platform Calgary as well as Alberta Innovate are making real pushes on tech, and they're starting to want to get into more of the social side of things. So they may be good resources for you to check out. So Platform Calgary and Alberta Innovates. And generally, when it comes to legal structure, there's a cliche of form follows function. You really want to understand your business model, your function, before you decide what kind of legal form you want. So I would explore as much as possible for as long as you can, figuring out what your business model is, to then decide what kind of, form you're going to have in terms of for-profit, not-for-profit, charitable, and things like that. So do your best to not rush in too quickly to a decision about what kind of legal structure you're going to have until you really figure out the business model side of things.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. And I've read some of the comments that Jeff here left here, and actually I know Jeff Zakay from Data for Good and from Civic Tech, and also people from the Center of Social Impact Technology himself. So I'm working definitely with him as well. Like, I'm very close with him. So
yeah, that's good. Part of what got me thinking of those is like, how do you differentiate yourself, or like what makes you different? And because you're gonna get like that question, like you're thinking about this sort of your unique value proposition, and if you do need to be separate as a group, so that you can explain that why. And I totally agree with Dan's point around the form follows function. It needs to be driven by your business model and what you're hoping to achieve. So don't rush into it. You can always change it though. Like, if you do have a current structure, it doesn't mean that that's the one you have to be locked into forever. You can evolve it, or you could be registered as a nonprofit, and you could create a for-profit arm. So don't feel like you have to get locked in, but also don't like necessarily rush the decision. And then just to keep in mind that there are less traditional options available in Alberta. So we have very old business legislation in some ways in Alberta. And so you can actually, one thing you can consider, some people aren't aware of this, even corporate lawyers, because it's so bloody old, but like a Part 9 public company is basically can be structured as kind of a hybrid in between a not-for-profit society and a for-profit company. So if you are going down the path, just like keep in mind that Part 9 public company, because it truly is actually a hybrid legislation. Like, BC put a ton of work into creating legislation that's for, I forget what they picked for their language, but I think it's like a community interest company. But really, the nonprofit public company model that we have in Alberta does the exact same. Creates a pretty lean governance structure. It creates clear ownership, but it's rooted in kind of a public impact. So there are less known models than just like for-profit, not-for-profit, charity. There's also the co-op model. Considering you have 10 members, co-ops have lots of cons, and that's in your original question, like, what are the pros and cons? There's pros and cons for any one, and you just have to kind of find the one that feels like the best fit. Co-op is one that you could at least consider, to not get into to pick on the cons of any particular model or the pros of any particular model. None of them are perfect, and there's pros and cons of all of them, and just try to have it be informed by your function as much as possible.
I see. Okay, awesome. No, great. Thank you so much. That's amazing advice. I'll take note of everything that you guys have put here, and try to figure it out myself too. I think we were born from Data for Good. In short, that's how we kind of relate to that community. We were a project from Data for Good. That was the original pool of volunteers, and then it became something that continued on. I think maybe the aim of Data for Good is a bit more one project here, one project there, and mostly working with nonprofit organizations. But we actually take mostly government open data. And again, our main goal is to really spark citizen engagement. That's what we pursue. It's like, we need engaged citizens in this society. So, and we think that information is part of the answer. Awesome.
That's
Right.
great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's very exciting, and it is neat to see something that's born out of data for good. That's very cool. All right. Is there we've gone through all of the questions that were shared with us. Is there anyone else here who would like to ask another question, or someone who's joined but hasn't yet asked a question? Again, we're all learners here. We're all talking about these things is important. There are no dumb or boring questions in any way. All right. Last call for questions. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, then maybe I just invite panelists. Is there anything that you want to share with us? Any updates or anything that you would like to share with the community?
Sure, I can share one that this is a new initiative that we are just launching at Momentum. Is that we've done a ton of coaching at Momentum in different forms, business coaching, financial coaching. And so we have a very long time business coach that worked with us. She's like the highest certified coach you can be. And she worked on getting our coaching curriculum certified by the International Coaching Federation. And one thing that makes our coaching curriculum quite unique is it's trauma informed. So it's based on being able to work well with people that have experienced trauma in their life. So we've just launched it as a new coach training program. So just this week, actually, we're kind of launching our beta tests. I believe we have 6 or 7 people in our very first coach training program. And it's essentially a fee-for-service based initiative. So you could say it's like one of our social enterprise activities, not getting into the definitional challenge. And so, yeah, hopefully we'll test out, see how successful it is. But one of the ways that we're exploring like how to use the hybrid revenue model is that it's a program that's eligible for the Canada Alberta Job Grant. So people that want to boost their coaching abilities can access the Canada Alberta Job Grant to help pay for that program. So just wanted to highlight it as one of the examples of our kind of continuing exploring of how we can be financially viable as an organization, but continue to advance our social impact, which for us, it's all about trying to have our local economy work better for everyone in different ways.
Very cool. Jane, Dan, anything you'd like?
I don't have anything in terms of an update, but the phrase quality over quantity has been going through my head a lot this afternoon. There wasn't a lot of you in terms of attendees, but you've been absolutely fantastic with both your questions and your ventures. So thank you so much for attending. I hope it was useful.
Thank you so much.
All right. And we also in the chat have added the registration. Omar has added the registration for our November 8th AMAASE session. That will be very much like this, but we will also be sharing a fair amount with you during that session on the YYC Innovation Week and all of the exciting things that will be taking place. That's from November. Oh boy, I got to test myself here. November 13th to 23rd-ish. It's somewhere in there. I'm getting a thumbs up from Maddie, so I got it right, hopefully. And we'll share lots. That's going to be going on then as well. All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
And thank you, Leah, for keeping us in line.
Oh, my pleasure.
Moving.
Today was what a great conversation. So interesting.
Thanks for letting me be
Thank you so
flying
much,
wall.
everyone, again.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.